So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm sure there'll probably be a few others who will be hopping on as we get started. But I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. My name is Christine Lee. I'm the priest in charge at St. Peter's Chelsea here in New York City, which is one of the epicenters of this global pandemic. I know we've got folks who are joining us from, I think, literally from across the globe and across the country. It's so great that modern technology lets us connect like this. I want us to jump in as quickly as we possibly can, but just a little backstory on how this call even came to be. Whenever I talk with my sister, Grace Shim, who's the executive director at Cornerstone Counseling Foundation in Chiang Mai, Thailand, I feel like the word resilience often comes up in our conversations. And so when all of this started unfolding here in New York and even really across the globe, that word just kept on coming into my mind because I felt like this is a word that's going to be really needed in the weeks and the months ahead as deaths were increasing, massive disruption on every single level. And I was feeling it myself, like my own need for resilience. And so the first person who popped into my head to talk to about this was my sister, Grace. And so Grace is somebody who I feel like has always been such a great combination of integrating just her mental health background and her faith, and is able to draw on both of those as really important resources for her own life and ministry. So when I asked her, she was game for it, but then she also said, hey, I've got this colleague at Cornerstone named Kevin Hamp. He's a psychotherapist, and he actually specializes in resilience. So I was like, hey, even better. So totally bring him on. And I'm just so grateful to the two of them for their willingness to be able to come and share with us. I thought perhaps in lieu of me going through their whole biographies, which you can find on their website, ccfthailand.org. Well, first of all, Kevin and Grace, welcome to our Zoom call. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I thought in one way that you guys can introduce yourself is that resilience is obviously important to both of you. And I'm wondering, like, what part of each of your stories makes you passionate about this topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, well, first of all, it's really great to be here and to see a lot of familiar faces on this call. And as I was thinking about that question, I think for me, it's really both personal and professional. So, I mean, personal in that, you know, Bob and I and our kids, we've been serving with the Evangelical Covenant Church for, actually, I was realizing it's almost 17 years, 11 in Thailand, and then before that, 6 years in this really small, beautiful, but remote town in Kyrgyzstan. And when I look back on that time, we've been doing medical and mental health care throughout these years. And I think when I look back on those years in particular, they were probably some of the toughest for me personally and as a wife and as a mother. And I mean, so much so that there were days we were just like, let's pack up our bags and head back home. And yet those are also some of the days when I look back and I have a fondness about it, because when I think about the word resilience, I wouldn't have identified it back then, but looking backwards, I think, okay, that was a time when I had to cultivate resilience through a really difficult struggle and being in a new culture and language. And so I think it's been just that experience, I think, and then on top of subsequent hardships or crises along the way, you know, continuing to see how, you know, just God's faithfulness in just cultivating that, I think, in my own life, and yet not so far more to go on the journey. So that's personally is seeing just God's own grace and gift to me in that. And then professionally, you know, Cornerstone, we provide counseling for cross-cultural workers, people who are working and serving in over 40 countries in the world, and particularly in our part of the world. And you see these just clients come in, these global workers that serve in really difficult places, and yet they are coming in for different issues. And yet, you know, I think Kevin and I have talked about how, you know, we would characterize them as resilient people. And so just trying to understand, like, what is it about human beings? You know, what is it the way that God created us in order to just capture and capitalize on, I think, a gift that he's given us as humanity. So that's for me, probably.
That's great.
Yeah, for me, I was thinking how, I mean, grew up in a stable home, and at a positive, I guess you would say, church experience, and then went off to actually study to become clergy, and following that, started working with more at-risk youth. And in that process, I think seeing like, how do these, in that case, middle school students whose parents are abusing drugs and don't have any income, how are they getting themselves out of bed in the morning and getting themselves to school? And maybe they're just making it. But I think for me, this passionate sense of why do the kids that have all the family structures, it seems, and all the resources to play sports and play music, why do they get all the accolades and the awards? Because these kids that seem to have everything against them, they're still like they're doing it. And I think that's where this resilience was really, I guess, became palpable for me. And then I felt I came actually to work as a youth pastor in an international church here in Thailand about 20 years ago, and that experience, watching workers struggle, and then at that time being very little support, I think just birthed this heart for, wow, it's hard internationally. What could we do to resource people? And so then I went off and studied and I guess specialized in that, and had a lot of theory. And then our family moved to Thailand almost 5 years ago, and you get to wrestle through, and your resilience gets tested. So it feels personal, and but mostly seeing, I guess, clients come in from really difficult situations. And I sometimes wonder, like, wow, like I just marvel in how God sustains and equips them. So it's just an honor to sit with people and celebrate how that comes about.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Well, I'm curious, like, as we're facing this global crisis that we're in right now, just like what you guys are seeing and hearing that makes this topic of resilience just so important, especially for this particular moment in our time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you hear the word unprecedented and universal, that this is a very unique, and I think probably only time in our history where people around the globe are all experiencing the threat of a virus, though I think our context and the degree of struggle are really different. And there's a real disparity about how that looks. But as I look around, as you read all that people are experiencing, I think the word that comes to mind is that everybody is experiencing, to some degree, some loss. Something's been lost, whether it's control or certainly just distancing relationships. And I think whenever we experience loss, we experience stress. And so regardless of our context, it's clear that people are weary, that loss has been tremendous on many levels with deaths, and I think relationships that are having to be disconnected. And so I think really, you think whatever time in history where we can share together knowledge and coming together and to talk about, how do we face or come against just adversity. And I think that's why I think this is our hope today, is not so much, I think, to give us a lot more knowledge and a lot more facts, but I know for Kevin and I, we really want to have people have some practical, simple tools. I feel like I'm inundated with so many articles on Facebook and news. And so as we talked today, we thought, we just want to have a very simple framework that people can remember, that they can hold on to each day, that again, in this moment, you may not feel like, oh, I just feel more and more resilient. But as you look back on this time, you'll think, oh, I'm so glad that I intentionally, use some of those practical tools, and looking back, think I'm a stronger person, for what I've gone through. So that's probably one of my hopes for our time.
Well,
Yeah, I think I observe a loss of, a loss of control, or a fear of the loss of control. And it's been said that our fear of losing control often ends up controlling us. And so we see examples of that. And I guess with that, though, when thinking about the question led me to, we also see beautiful things coming out of weakness and brokenness. And so for me, that question was the sense of, well, we see fear, polarization, hopelessness, but then we see like generosity and creativity and these beautiful things. Yeah, so there's tension, I think, within me. Both are real, and I guess my desire for today is just space to authentically celebrate how God has crafted and formed each of us. That we'd really be able to embrace that as the heart of God towards us in the midst of pain and suffering. And just that we would feel collectively, even though we're staring through these screens, a sense of compassion and mutual compassion, self-compassion. And ultimately we'd be, we'd be able to point each other to Christ in our understanding of who God really is and how he's relating to us. So, and like with grace, just really, well, hopefully it'll be practical.
Yeah.
So.
Well, speaking of practical, just to get us all on the same page, I'm wondering, can you define, like, what is resilience?
Yeah, Kevin, why don't you start with that? And
I think maybe the simplest analogy for resilience is the idea of a rubber band, that idea of being stretched and then returning to form. So I think that imagery, sometimes we think, I can't be stretched any further, I'll never be the same again. And so that's, I guess, maybe a helpful analogy when you look at the literature, and there's just this growing body of literature, specifically over the last 20 years, but it has this idea of being able to, the capacity to rebound, strengthened and more resourceful. So it's a process. It's not like I am or I'm not, and I'm gonna pass or I'm gonna fail. So there's the study of this process, and we don't know if it's basically agreed, we don't know if we're resilient until it's tested. So we see it in the midst of, so I guess the main part is that I just want to highlight it's a process, or depending on where we are in the world, a process of continual facing of adversity, and how we leverage our resources, basically internal and external resources is what they look at with resilience.
yeah, I was thinking how, when they talk about you can't have courage unless you have fear. And I think it's difficult to cultivate resilience unless you're in the midst of adversity. And so I think similar to what Kevin's saying, I think having this opportunity to learn how to respond to, right? I mean, having that ability to rebound. I was thinking about rubber bands and also just thinking about muscles, that as we strengthen muscles in our body, that they also are stretched, they're broken, they're repaired, and then they come back and then they're a stronger muscle as a result. And so I also think of resiliency as kind of like that muscle that we are strengthening. It comes through tearing, it comes through having to rip a little bit of some of those fibers. And yet as we work, and again, it's not overnight, but over time, that we do see the way that God is, just the resources that he's given us. And I think that's the biggest part about resilience, is that it's not that we have to reach outside of ourselves for things that we don't have. It's internal and external that are already within us, that God has already gifted us with it. And then how do we utilize those, recognize them first of all, and then utilize them, I think, for that building and that cultivating.
Yeah, thanks. Well, before I ask you guys the next question, I just wanted to say to everyone who's listening that as Grace and Kevin are talking, like if there are questions that are coming up in your mind or something specific you want to ask them, you can just drop it into the chat. If you are feeling shy and you don't want everybody to know that it's you asking the question, you can just message to me personally, and then we'll hopefully have some time for Q&A at the end, and then we can ask them these questions. So feel free to do that at any moment. So, you know, a lot of times when we think about resilience, we think about it as being like mental toughness or kind of like gritting our teeth and pressing through. But just knowing the two of you, you guys see it from a little bit more of a holistic perspective. And I'm curious, like in your work as counselors, how have you guys helped others to actually cultivate resilience in the face of the challenges that people are facing?
Kevin, you want to, we kind of
Sure.
broken up these questions, but you want to just go ahead and
Yeah, okay.
introduce, how our framework.
Jump in.
So yeah, so there's these different, you know, counselors use different theoretical frameworks. Regardless of the framework, for me, personally, is understanding as a client walks through the door, believing that they are resilient. They often don't believe it. They may lack self-awareness, but this sense of I don't say it lightly when you know, you have a little bit of background information you receive generally before someone walks through the door, and they don't come in often beautifully presented. But honestly, when they walk through the door, I see a beautiful person by God's grace. We see exceptions to things that would want us to question that, but within these unique, amazing people, helping us, like just that discovery of what is it that you continue to do every day, regardless of how hard it is. You know, as crazy as it sounds, if they still brush their teeth every day, why? What is under the fact that every day at 7:30 they pick up their toothbrush and pursue that? Where is this? Where is this resilience? So just believing that it's in people and the discovery, and as people embrace that, there's a sense of, wow, I have more capacity. I've never really thought about that. So there's this discovery process of I'm seeing how God joins them, meets them, and strengthens how He's uniquely created them.
And I think, you know, as we've been thinking about how to kind of approach today, and are just based on the work that we do with our clients, but also just in terms of some of those models that are out there, you know, we've really kind of based it out of the greatest commandment, right? The first and second greatest commandment, which really is to love God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, and then loving others as yourself. And so, you know, thinking about, it's not just about myself. It's not just about grit and, you know, reaching down deep inside and kind of with effort, trying to make it through the adversity, but in relation to God, in relation to others, in relation to self, that there has to be a holistic way in which we approach our resilience. And so those are the three kind of areas that we want to talk about today, in terms of just the framework of, you know, who we are. I am, and I can. And we want to introduce, I think, what they call the resilience donut, that really speaks to some of those internal factors of what do I have, you know, who do I have, you know, who am I, and then what can I do in face of that. So I've asked, actually, we're going to show, Kevin, do you have the graphic to share on the screen there with the resilience donut?
Yeah, I guess my question was, will people get a link of that after? Just to clarify.
Yes. Yeah, so yeah,
okay.
I can send it to folks.
Okay. So I failed on uploading. Grace, do you have it in front? I thought because of you guys will get this later, but essentially it's not too hard to comprehend. There's a donut. It has a hole in the middle, and in the middle of that donut, it's not a fancy graphic. Are these three internal characteristics or factors, and then surrounding the donut within that framework are 7 external factors that we're gonna look at. And so
if it's that PDF that you sent, I could share it from my screen because I have it.
Would
that be
perfect.
helpful? Okay.
I knew I would get distracted, and
don't even worry. Don't even worry.
Okay.
I'm fairly new to Zoom too, so hopefully I can pull this off. Okay. So
just that first.
There it is.
First page.
Is this?
Yeah, the first page.
Okay, this one. This one.
There it is. There we go. So we have a resilient donut. This research has come out of Australia. even though the link there is to a UK site. And the the amazing thing that I find is Grace was kind of referencing is we see in the greatest commandment, God honoring the complexity of who we are, heart, mind, soul, and strength. And in the context of we are relational beings, God, neighbor, and self are all relationships. And when we look at the literature, these are the reference points that it's like obviously God knows our thoughts, our feelings, our physical beings, our souls. I just so when we look there on the handout, as you can see, the three areas, and the donut say I have, I am, and I can. And essentially, when a meta-analysis of a host of data highlights that resilient people who seem to have everything against them can somehow answer meaningfully, fill in the blanks on I have ... I am ... and I can. Above that on your handout, you'll see who. So it's who I have, my relationship to others, we might say neighbor, who I am in relationship. The literature would say in relationship to. We often find that out of our human to human relationships. We also see it clearly in the literature, our relation to God, and then what I can do, how we relate to ourselves. So we're going to unpack that as we go through. Out of these 7, so you can see the difference in the handout between children and adolescents, which is where the research actually began, and then they learned how it clearly continues to apply across our lifespan. So, but there's 7 factors there, and we can think like, well, even if I can answer those questions, like, man, I don't have a partner currently, or I don't hardly have any skills, or I just moved, I don't have any friends. And we can look at a deficit base, which is typically how humanity, when the research is really clear, when we look at something like this, we think, what am I lacking? How do I give it? How do I attend to that? But essentially, what we know in studying folks in this massive amount of data is if people can fill in the blanks on 3 out of 7 of those external factors, whether it be work or family or education, we see that those people can basically make it through anything.
All right.
Maybe I'll pause there.
You're just pause there. Okay. Yeah. And so what we want to do, we're not going to necessarily talk through all 7 of those factors, but we really wanted to focus in on the I have, I am, and I can. And, I think when we think about who I have, even as Kevin was referencing there, that, ultimately resilience is rooted in relationship. We think of it sometimes, I think, and I would say maybe American individualism, that it's really about I and what I am able to do apart from everybody else. But, we can't have resilience apart from people, from community, that there's a need to depend on, right? Whether it's depending on God, depending on others, or just awareness of ourselves. And so the I have is, who do I have in my life, right? That loves me, that cares for me, who are the ones that I can lean on and look to during this time. And, our bodies are created. And when you stop and think about how God innately created us, is that we are wired for relationship, that our brain, lights up, right, with oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine, that when we are in relationship with others, that there's something about our brains that there's a pleasure that we experience with one another. And so when we, I think recognizing that, in the way that we've been created, that when we look to relationships in our lives that are meaningful to us, that is when, that's part of what it means to think about I have. And so I have a phrase that I use often with clients that I feel like is really meaningful. And it says that suffering is intolerable, but suffering alone, or suffering is inevitable. I'm sorry, suffering is inevitable, but suffering alone is intolerable. And I think what that says is that, crisis, suffering, hardship, that is just part of what it means to be human. But the part that makes it hard or difficult to bear is when we do it alone. And there's some studies I think that are really interesting, just in kind of social science, about how even just holding somebody's hand when you have a threat of pain or, you know, potential pain, that it just reduces the stress that you feel just by holding somebody's hand. And I was thinking, I do this myself. I hate getting my blood drawn. And I often, like, especially, I'm less so now, but in my early years of marriage, I always would make Bob hold my hand whenever I got my blood drawn, because just holding his hand and having that needle stuck in my arm, it's like it just reduced the pain or helped me to feel safe. And that was really important. That's so important for us. Another study says that actually you can stand, if you stand in front of a hill and you kind of visually perceive how tall it is, it feels much higher than when you stand in front of that same hill with a friend. That if you stand next to somebody that you know, who you know you care for, that the height of that hill seems lower. And so again, it says that when we are in crisis, that part of resilience then is reaching out. And, you know, Ecclesiastes talks about that, right? That two are better than one, that, you know, a cord of three strands can't be broken. And, you know, I think about, I've heard so many people say during this time, like, I've reconnected with so many people through Zoom or through Skype during this crisis. There's something in us when we think about, I want to reach out, that when, you know, when we are under stress, there's something in us that says, I want to reach out to somebody that I know, somebody that loves me and cares for me. That's really key in, I think, in this part of building resilience. And so we really want to encourage people, the intentionality behind that, to identify then people, and not just to think about them, but to really savor the relationships. We can't do it literally by being physically close right now, but that connecting and out of relational connection, that we find that we feel that we can carry the load better, you know, when we're with others. So that's part of it. And Kevin, I don't know if you want to add to that in terms
No, I was just thinking, I was reminded of the previous week was a particularly challenging week in our household, and just prior to that week, I got this text from a longtime friend, and you probably, a lot of us can think of something similar, but so just on the front end of this week, I get these words as like, you know, my dear friend, in these odd days, we seek to find things to ground us, to anchor us in the past and give hope for the future. I'm aware of your precious friendship over the last 19 years, and I look forward to the next time we'll see each other. And he carries on. And I found as that week got increasingly harder, I found myself going back to those words, not just to the words, but to time spent with this individual. And unrelated to whatever Charles, when I would think about that, within me would rise the strength of I can make it. And it led me to what he had sent a few years back. He'd sent, I don't know if you can see it on the screen. He's Jewish, and he lived through the Israeli war, and the latest one I think was 2014, and so he was literally being bombed in his neighborhood, and made out of the rockets that were landing around him. And he talked about the beauty that can come out of very broken worlds. And so there's this, like, it's not just him, but there's these visual anchors that anchor me in this relationship, that we are, you know, beauty, and we aren't going to snap. It feels like we're going to snap, but others remind us we're not going to snap. And anchoring ourselves in those realities is just what the literature, and I'm sure our own experiences, can testify to. Yeah.
So actually what we wanted to do during this time is, you know, not just talk to you, but we actually wanted to make part of this experiential, right? Because I think there's, you know, again, we have a lot of knowledge in our head, we know, but our desire is really to connect our head to our heart. And so we're actually going to ask you guys, we're going to take 20 seconds in each of these sections to practice what it means. And when you think about savoring, right? So we usually think about savoring in terms of food, you know, it's like rolling it around in your mouth, really thinking about the texture, the taste, you know, what it feels like to have it kind of swallow, and the satisfaction in your stomach. But we want you to actually take a moment to savor. So we want you to think about somebody who has deeply loved you. You know, who is someone you can identify, whether they are still alive now or not. But think about someone who has deeply loved you, cared for you, at some point in your lifetime, maybe even present. And we're going to take 20 seconds of just silence. And we want you to recall that person to your mind, to think about, what did he or she look like? How did he or she look at you? What kind of eyes did they look at you with? Did you see delight? Did you see just tenderness? Was it care? But bring that person to mind, and I'm gonna time us and just give us 20 seconds to just close our eyes. Just take a deep breath. Just allow yourself to relax. Take a couple deep breaths. And bring that person to mind right now. Call them right to the center, right in front there. And then I'm gonna just pause here for 20 seconds, and then I'll call us back together. Okay. It's interesting. They say that negative experiences in our lives are very easily stored in our long-term memory. But when we have a positive experience, we're quick to forget. We kind of pass over them very quickly. But research shows that actually, if you take 20 seconds, minimum 20 seconds, just to stop and savor, a positive interactional relational experience, that it is more easily stored in that long-term memory. And just like Kevin was saying with his friend, in times of hardship last week, to recall to mind somebody who has cared well for you, that allows you to experience, re-experience what it was like to be with that person, to know what it was like to be loved by that person. And that gives us strength, cultivates our resilience in our time. So that's a simple exercise that even at the end of the day, you can stop as you lay your head down on the pillow, take 20 seconds to just call to mind somebody who has cared for you, even in that day, or that same person as an internal resource to you.
And so this is an area of study that called interpersonal neurobiology. So when we're studying what's physiologically happening in the brain as we engage in relationship, we can actually start to measure these dynamics. One neuropsychologist argues that what many of us just experienced in that 20-second exercise is a sense of that person really knows me. They see me at my best and my worst, and they delight in me. And this psychologist would suggest that when they actually measure it, that is what they would articulate as joy. And it registers in the brain in a unique way, being fully known with our weakness and sensing someone's delight. And it's that same part of the brain that we draw on to manage our stress.
Oh, cool.
So then out of relationship. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, no, I was going to then, no, keep going.
Okay. No, I was just going to move on to our next point. So if you wanted to say something.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so then really we started with relationship because it's kind of Jesus with skin on in our lives, right? And that it's out of relationship that we actually begin to understand who we are, because they represent and mirror for us how God has created us to be. And so we want to move on to what it means to be who I am.
So the I am part of that inner donut is as simple as it sounds, is out of these I have relationships from early part of our life. We just naturally form these I am statements. We might not be fully conscious of them, but like I am liked, I am loved, I am respectable, that when they look at children and the odds are all against them, essentially they can answer those in those types of ways. If we think of it from a Christ follower perspective, it can look like I am a child of God. I am chosen by God. I'm a member of God's family. I'm a temple of His Holy Spirit. This is at the root of the things that enable us to empower us in hard times. Where we see some other resilience research that overlaps and informs this statement is research that began about 20 years ago, as they tried to understand, when they looked at religious texts and wisdom literature, they kind of from a global perspective, what's true of all humanity? Out of that, they identified 6 key virtues, things like wisdom and courage, justice. And then when they looked at those 6 virtues, they said, well, what do those actually look like in action? And over like a 3-year period, they have these criteria, and again, we're talking about not gender or cultural sort of specific. What is true about humanity? And they identified these 24 what they call character strengths, not traits. They are continuing to grow, and depending on our environment, they are shaped in different seasons of our lives. But those are things like bravery, curiosity, social intelligence, teamwork. And the funny thing is, we all possess all 24. Just the literature shows that no one has the exact same 24. It's like a fingerprint. And so we are going to get through challenging times in a totally unique way. And this study has been done, or this tool has been used, I think, over 11 million times. There's no one with the exact same fingerprint. So getting back to this I am statement, we could look at those and like, personally, if I look at what they call the top 5 for me, and again, this is a free tool, and there's a resource in your handout there, so you guys could go on and do this, and it's in multiple languages. But when I look at that and I think about, wow, in the midst of this challenge, for me, it's I am loving, I am socially intelligent, I am honest, I am a leader, I am spiritual, meaning I see my place in the grand scheme of the universe. And generally, if I think about the highlights of my day, it'll likely include some aspect of those pieces coming together about who I uniquely am and how I interact with my world and my relationships. So it's just many people, actually most people, aren't self-aware in terms of being able to identify and celebrate their strengths. So this is a season where we can give some intentional thought to, I don't think I'm strong, but the research pushes back on that. I am. How am I uniquely strong? And how can I believe that about me, but also draw that out in others? Well, the thing about these I am statements, if we can act on our top 5, the studies are really convincing. We're 3 times more likely to report a higher quality of life. We are 6 times more engaged in our workplace. It's essentially just saying, God, you made me this way. Help me be who you've created me to be and how you've used my world. Versus this, often we get results from a tool and we look at our least results and then how can we fix them? And the literature is really clear. We can really, not that we shouldn't tend to them, but in times of hardship, trying to master or grow areas of weakness, we're going to get very little traction.
Yeah, and I think in light of, strengths, I think when I think about I mean, even as Kevin and I were talking about this, I think in reality too, that there are parts of us that we aren't really that thrilled about too in this season, right? That we see our weaknesses as well. And when I think about that in relationship to God, that it's both knowing our strengths and knowing our weaknesses. And I think, I think part of when I relate to God, it's knowing that He's created me in this kind of unique way with my strengths, but He also knows the places where I'm weak. And for me, I think one of the hardest things about this crisis is I think it literally has been like a mirror that exposes maybe some of the other sides of me that I'm not that thrilled about. And it's been hard, I think, to be compassionate towards myself during this time. And in terms of being able to say, yes, I see daily how, God, you have created me. I'm learning to recognize my strengths. But what do I do when I see the irritability, or see my lack of patience, or see how tired I am and how non-productive I feel? That in that moment too, it's learning to be kind to myself, and to say, in the way that you've made me, with both. And I think we just are self-acceptance, and this seeing myself through the eyes of God and the way that he sees me and the way that he accepts me, I think is really important. I think embracing both our vulnerability and our strengths, I think is also key during this time too.
And it reminds me of, we don't need to hide or kid ourselves or others,
Right.
but the joy is that sense of, whether it be with God or others, you know me, you see me, strong and weak, and you continue to delight in me. And so those negative statements can be like, oh, in these times, I'm lazy, I am shameful, I'm stupid, how did I do that again? All of us are experiencing that in these difficult times of isolation. But then we have the gospel that says there's no longer any condemnation. God feels no wrath towards you whatsoever. He only feels love toward you. So we can say things like, I am God's delight. My God still sings over me. I don't get it, but by faith, I believe that to be true, and anchoring ourselves. So wanted to introduce another little exercise, but maybe before we do that, maybe just pause if there's anything, Grace, that you wanted to interject, or Christine.
No, I think that sounds good. Yeah, Christine, if you have anything.
Go. No, please continue.
Well, again, just encourage you to gentle your breathing. I know for me, I feel self-conscious closing my eyes on a screen. So, I mean, you can do, whatever. You can turn off your video, or just whatever, stare off into the corner. There's so many screens open. I don't know if anyone's going to be watching anyways, but so just gentle our breathing, and just feel your body relax. And I just want to share with us some lyrics spoken by me, who doesn't necessarily know you, but perhaps you could imagine that Jesus may speak these words to you, or someone who knows you really well. Either you can think of a person, just, I guess, to introduce this, someone who you believe sees your goodness and believes in you. So you can choose in your mind right now whether you want to imagine this Jesus speaking to you in this way, or a friend. I like you as you are, exactly and precisely. I think you turned out nicely, and I like you as you are. I like you as you are, without a doubt or question, or even a suggestion, because I like you as you are. I like your disposition, your facial composition, and with your kind permission, I'll shout it to a star. I like you as you are. I wouldn't want to change you, or even rearrange you, not by far. I like you. I-L-I-K-E-Y-O-U. I like you, yes I do. I like you, Y-O-U. I like you. I like you as you are. And hopefully we can carry that savoring sense even as we move on to the third of the three that we've been discussing. I know some of us pushed us back. We want to say, no, but you don't see this part of me. And I'm pretty good at hiding, but firmly believe that as Jesus looked at Zacchaeus, why did Zacchaeus get so excited? As Jesus looked at Peter and said, I'm going to call you rock. These are examples of how does Jesus really see us? Does he genuinely like us? So this final statement is, I can. It focuses on our own abilities, things I can do, not to try and win approval, but just simply an action-oriented sense of how we can contribute. And the research is clear about our capacity to give to others is essential to flourishing. So these seasons of fear and uncertainty, they can leave us feeling stuck, and can probably all identify with a sense of powerlessness at times. And then our brains, to cap it all off, are really built with this negativity bias that I think we already sort of referenced. So consequently, we actually, most people, might surprise you, between 75 to 80% of people spend most of their time complaining about what other people can't do, perhaps, or what they themselves can't do. But this is our inclination of humanity, and so we just take in the negative and often think like, I'm stuck, I've tried everything, I'm failing. But it's interesting that at least one study shows that people who remain more, or you might say resilient people, wake up and say, what can I do to have a better day? As simple as that sounds, that's what the research highlights. What can I do to have a better day? So it's actually action-oriented. So it may be, I can encourage others. I can share a meal. I can find ways to solve problems. I can control myself. I can find someone to help me. These would all be examples of this core aspect of I can. So when we look at human flourishing, as they've really studied it over the last number of years, they've identified 5 key factors of what it looks like to flourish, and they can actually measure these and do. And so these 5 are an acronym called PERMA, and the P stands for positive emotion, E engagement, R is relational connection, M is meaning, and A is accomplishment. So out of these, if we want to flourish, those are the things that we actually look at measuring in social science. Out of those 5, 2 of them specifically highlight the I can, and one is engagement, and it's a sense of using our gifts, natural and or spiritual gifts, and experiencing a regenerating energy. An example of this would be in an old film called Chariots of Fire, where you have the example of Eric Liddell, the Olympic runner, and he says, God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. And whatever that might be for each of us, God made me, I can, and when I do that, I feel God's pleasure. In other words, Stanford professor Fred Luskin would say, it's really about what is your unique contribution in that I can. And in these social isolation times, it's like, well, I can't do this and this and this. But again, maybe it's about shifting to, oh, wow, I can, expanding that idea and thinking through those from that angle. The other one, so there's engagement, and then there's accomplishment. With the literature is really clear. To flourish requires challenge. We need some degree of challenge. These are exponentially challenging times for some of us, but with an appropriate degree of challenge, as we act, we continue to grow, and as we grow, we can celebrate. And these things, again, promote this sense of I'm not powerless. I have a contribution to make.
Yeah, and I would say, I think when we, what we often talk about with clients is what is out of your control and what is within your control. I think that I can statement is being able to identify, okay, there's a lot right now that's going on that I cannot control, but there are these things within my sphere, within my family, within my relationships that I can contribute to. And it's funny, as I read like on Facebook, I mean, I'm thinking people are doing all kinds of amazing things, productive, reading new books and cooking. And it in some ways, that makes me feel like I should be doing, my can should be really productive and producing some kind of new, innovative, creative thing. And I think some of us in this season have to be okay with and actually celebrate, I can, I know brush my teeth, or I can be faithful in these little things that God asked me to do each day, whether it's to love my kids, even though I'm homeschooling and working all day long, whether it's to say a kind word to my husband, whether it's, deciding to cook a home meal instead of ordering out. I mean, there's so many things that when we think about I can, they don't have to be kind of heroic types of ways of what we can do. But a lot of times it's just in this season, if I can say at the end of the day, here are a few things that I did today that were actionable, that were contributing to. And I think it's easy to kind of fall into a self-focus and to just kind of self-preserve in this time. And we want to encourage people to just think about what is one thing I could do today that's within my control, within my strengths, within who God has created me to be, that could have impact and meaning towards someone else, towards the community, even just in caring for myself too. So I think that's part of the I can, is it doesn't have to be big. It can be a small thing each day.
And we might consider it small, but we have no idea the ramifications. So for instance,
Right.
I think hopefully we can all maybe identify at least someone who prays for us. And we might not think about, I can pray, or I can admit my powerlessness, but I can rely on the love and power of our Supreme Creator. And so, just again, maybe just taking some time to just note that when we're feeling stuck. So those were the three we wanted to highlight. And I am, I have, and I can. And fundamentally believe that even if it's feeling too much, that anchoring that all in a relational context, whether it be with God or with others, that we are going to continue to put one foot in front of the other. It may not be glorious. We may not feel like a hero, but that's also not that's not what's packed into this idea of resilience.
And I think, the things that we share, this isn't just things that we made up, but that there are numerous studies and research that really back up that the simplicity of these three things, who I have, who I am, what I can do, right? That even just every night as you lay down to sleep or throughout a day, just those three statements, that if you can answer them and reflect on a day to, as you lay down, that in and of itself, that you will just feel a strengthening that rises within you. And I think it's not just for ourselves, but how do we call that out in other people? This is who you are. This is who you have. This is the impact you've made on my life. This is what you can do. So it's not just for ourselves. That, like we started off, resilience happens in community. And so it's reaching out to others to encourage them. Like I was thinking of Kevin's friend doing that for him. That who could you be doing this with just in your own circle right now? And to call that forth, God's beauty and creation of how they've been made, and to call that out as well. And so that's really, kind of what we want to, it's not rocket science, it's actually quite simple. And that's why we really wanted to share that, because we wanted to make it something that you could remember as you walk away from our time.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And, so you often find that it's like the simplest things are often the hardest things to do, but then are often like the most important things to do that we
Mhm.
don't. I'm just mindful that we've got 5 minutes left, and
Mhm.
there is we've got sort of a quiet group here, but we do have a question from Shannon who's asking if there are any very practical exercises to do with kids in particular to remind them of these values.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, we do have on our resource, we have the VIA, which is the Values in Action Institute on Character. There's a link to a page actually that has some really great exercises that you can do with kids on calling out character strengths. But Kevin, my kids are all gone and grown up now, so I'm assuming Shannon, you're talking about maybe smaller kids. So Kevin, I think you do a great job with your kids.
Oh, so if you go to viacharacter.org, if your kids are 10 and up, they could do it. It's a lengthy questionnaire. Depending on how our kids are put together, that might feel a little bit like not like something they get excited about. But you could look at it or do it yourself. It just takes a few minutes. There's also one on the University of Pennsylvania, authentic happiness.org, I think is or .com is the site. And so you can do that from 8 years up. So for instance, I did that with my 8-year-old, maybe a couple of weeks ago. I promise you, I did not force it on her. I told her she didn't need to do it. I tried different ways. She said, no, I want to do it. And so we worked through those 198 questions as together. But anyways, consequently, we have identified, and she resonates with these 5 signature strengths. And so for her, her top one is bravery. So looking to call that out. How are you being brave? So she's having a hard time sleeping through the night, and she's saying, but I can be brave. But that comes from so those are some examples of celebrating the strengths versus the deficits of I'm scared. Well, that's true. We can be scared and we can be brave. So that'd just be one example. But the resilience Doughnut resilience report also have amazing resources for children. So these data sets are being used really well used in the VIA, and the resilience Doughnut are being used in the classroom, many classrooms, and the outcomes are exciting.
That's great. Well, in our last 3 minutes, do you guys have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave with folks?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about God, others, and self, in those first and second greatest commandments, and thinking about, who I have and who I am and what I can do, one of the things, the ways that I think about life is I always have an option or an opportunity to turn toward or to turn away. And I think that's what we're kind of calling people to is daily we make that choice. Am I going to turn toward God and toward others, toward myself to be more aware of what's happening within me? Or am I going to turn away and to try to do it by myself without others to avoid what I see within me? And when I think about resilience, I think that's what it's over a long period of time of turning toward, right? I mean, there are many times when I've turned away, but my trajectory is always, God, help me to turn back toward you. Help me to turn back toward others. Help me to be willing to see and turn toward myself and see what's within me. And so I think I'd really want to encourage people that, this is what is Eugene Peterson, right? It's a long obedience in the same direction, that in this season of however many months we're going to be socially isolated in this crisis, that I really want to encourage people, continue to just turn toward him, turn toward others, and turn toward yourself, and in who you are and what you have and what you can do. And for me, that's been a daily kind of framework for me to think about is what am I going to do in turning toward or away, because that's what God has called us to do according to how he's made me. So that would be one of my final thoughts.
Thanks. Kevin?
So in stress, we generally, and our whole being tells us we're not safe. Our mind, our body, and we tend to often lean towards catastrophic thoughts. And Albert Schweitzer said that happiness is wanting what we have. Not that we're necessarily going to be happy in an overwhelmed moment, but the point being is and what the research just really highlights is, what are the resources that we have? If we can identify those, it infuses in vision. It infuses strength that comes that we didn't necessarily naturally believe that's there, and so that is one element. The other thing is just relationally, at the foundation of satisfied relationships is a commitment to sustained curiosity to know and discover the other. So in our marriages, we see that those that continue to think, I don't know my partner entirely, and I get to discover them throughout their whole life. What am I discovering of beauty in them right now? So this commitment to curiosity, generally, if it's someone that we know and love, it's going to fuel a positive sense of, I want to know more and I want to draw from them. So a sustained curiosity, not just to know yourself, but looking around to those we love. Be curious. Don't assume I know exactly how you're going to respond under this stressful situation. But hunt for those things and celebrate those things collectively.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate your sharing. Giving us super practical things. I wish we had more time to be able to talk with you guys. But thank you so much for just giving us this deposit of resilience during this really challenging time. So for all of those of you who are still on the call, if you just, if I don't already have your email address, and if you didn't receive an email from me earlier today, just shoot me an email at rsvp@stpeterschelsea.org. I stuck it in the chat, and I'll make sure to send out that file to you all. I think there's a way you can do it via Zoom, but I'm a newbie at Zoom and I don't quite know how to do it. So I'll email it to everyone, and we'll make sure that you get that. So thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great night. And praying for you all. Pray that God would make you more resilient as you draw on those resources that He has already given you and that are already within your reach. So blessings on all of you in this upcoming week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah.
Bye.